Settle in, if you will. Make yourself comfortable, perhaps with a blanket pulled up to your chin, and let the world outside fade away. This is a story that unfolds best in the quiet of the night, when the only sounds are the soft hum of the room and the gentle rhythm of your own breathing. We are going to travel back, far back, to a time before GPS, before maps with dotted lines, before compasses that point north with such certainty. A time when the desert, the Great Sahara, was not a barrier, but a highway. A living, breathing, shifting ocean of sand and stone. And we are going to follow the footsteps of the ancient Nubian traders, the ones who crossed these vast, empty spaces without ever getting lost. How did they do it? It is a question that seems almost magical, but the answer, as we will discover together, is woven from patience, from observation, from generations of whispered knowledge passed down like heirlooms in the dark. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the desert at night, not the desert of midday, when the sun is a hammer and the air shimmers with heat. No, imagine the desert after sunset, when the sky becomes a deep, bottomless blue, and then, slowly, the stars come out. Not just a few stars, but a cascade of them. A river of light so thick and bright that you feel you could reach up and stir them with your finger. The temperature drops, and a cool breeze whispers across the dunes. It is in this quiet, starlit world that the Nubian trader would begin his most important work. He would not rely on a compass or a map. He would rely on the memory of his feet, the knowledge of his ancestors, and the silent language of the heavens. He would know, for example, that the constellation we call the Big Dipper is not just a big spoon in the sky, but a marker, a pointer, a friend that never leaves the northern horizon in those lands. He would watch the way the stars wheel overhead during the night, and he would let them guide him, as reliably as a lighthouse guides a ship home. The land beneath him was not a blank slate. It had its own signatures. The Nubian trader would look for the subtle curve of a sand dune, the way the wind had carved a pattern into a rock face, the particular taste of the air that came from a distant oasis. He learned to read the desert as you might read a familiar book, knowing what comes on the next page before you turn it. He knew that a certain type of pebble, smooth and dark, meant that water was not far away, perhaps hidden in a dry riverbed that only showed its secret after a rare rain. He understood the language of the acacia trees, the way their branches twisted to show the prevailing wind, and how the birds would gather where there was life. It was a slow, patient kind of knowledge, built over a lifetime of walking, a lifetime of looking, a lifetime of listening. And oh, the walking. It was not a hurried thing. A caravan of traders might travel only a few miles in a day. The camels, those magnificent, grumpy, long-lashed ships of the desert, would set a pace that seemed impossibly slow. 10 miles, 12 miles, sometimes, if the route was very difficult, even less. But this slowness was not a weakness. It was a strategy. It allowed the trader to notice everything. To notice the slight change in the color of the sand that might indicate an underground spring. To notice the flight pattern of a falcon or the silence that fell over the dunes when a sandstorm was brewing on the horizon. trader did not fight the desert. He worked with it. He became part of its rhythm, breathing in time with the wind, walking in step with the sun and the moon. The routes themselves were not pathways in the way we think of a road. There was no pavement, no signposts. Instead, there were corridors of memory, carved into the land by thousands of years of use. The Nubians called these routes the Sikat, or the ways. They connected the great kingdoms of the Nile, like the kingdom of Kush, down to the green valleys of the interior of Africa, and then up, across the yellow expanse of the Sahara, to the shores of the Mediterranean. One such route, the Darb el Arbain, the 40 days road, stretched for over 700 miles from the region of Darfur in present-day Sudan to the town of Asiut in Egypt. Imagine that. 40 days. A month and a half of walking through nothing but sand and rock and sky. No roadside inns, no convenience stores, no signs saying you are here. Just the trader, his camels, his goods, and his ability to find his way. What did he carry? The cargo was as varied as the lands he passed through. Gold, of course, from the mines of Nubia itself, gold that glittered like captured sunlight, ivory from the elephants of the southern forests, frankincense and myrrh, those precious resins that burned with a sweet smoke in the temples of the pharaohs, ostrich feathers, leopard skins, ebony wood, and slaves. It is a part of history we must not shy away from, even in a sleepy story. The trade in human beings was a dark thread woven into the fabric of the ancient world, and it tarnishes the silver of the trader's tale. But for now, let us focus on the skill of navigation, the quiet miracle of crossing the desert without a map. The trader looked at the stars, yes, but he also looked at the sand. The sand itself has a memory, you see. The dunes are not random piles of dust. They are shaped by the wind into repeating patterns, each with its own orientation. A Barkhan dune, shaped like a crescent, always has its horns pointing downwind. A traverse dune, long and straight, runs perpendicular to the prevailing wind. The trader, having grown up in this landscape, could glance at the shape of a dune and know very quickly which direction he was facing. He could feel the orientation of the sand ripples under his feet. He could taste the salt in the air that told him a dry lake bed was near. It is a kind of literacy that we have largely lost, the ability to read the land like a living book. But perhaps the most important tool in the trader's kit was something far simpler. It was the camel, not just as a beast of burden, but as a living compass. The camel, particularly the one-humped dromedary favored by the Nubians, has an uncanny ability to sense water. It can smell moisture from miles away, long before any human could perceive it. A well-trained camel would make subtle adjustments to its course, leaning slightly toward the nearest water source, even if that source was hidden underground. The wise trader did not pull the reins and force the camel to go his way. Instead, he trusted the camel, letting the animal guide him, because the camel knew the desert better than any human ever could. It was a partnership, a quiet conversation between man and beast, whispered across the silence of the dunes. And then there were the landmarks, The desert is not featureless if you know how to look. There are rock outcroppings that rise like islands from a sea of sand. There are wadis, ancient riverbeds that cut through the landscape, now dry, but still lined with thorny trees and tough grasses. There are plateaus, great flat-topped mesas that can be seen from a day's journey away. The Nubian trader would give these landmarks names, not official names on a map, but names that held meaning for his caravan. That rock that looks like a crouching lion. The place where the wind always blows from a certain direction. The gap in the hills where the sun sets at a certain time of year. These were his signposts, his memory markers, his way of turning the terrifying emptiness of the desert into a known, familiar space. To travel with such a caravan would be a test of the spirit. You would wake before dawn, while the stars were still shining, and you would eat a simple meal of dried meat and flatbread, washed down with water that tasted of clay. You would load the camels, grunting and groaning under the weight of the packs. You would set off, the sand crunching under your feet, the cold air biting at your cheeks. The sun would rise, a great orange ball that climbed slowly, and the heat would begin to build. By midday, the world would become a furnace. You would walk in a kind of trance, your mind empty, your body moving on its own. You would see mirages, shimmering lakes of water that vanished as you approached. You would feel the sand getting into everything, your hair, your clothes, your thoughts. And you would keep walking, because there was no other choice. The desert does not allow for hesitation, but the night made it worthwhile. When the sun set and the stars returned, the caravan would stop. The camels would kneel. The traders would build a small fire from the bundles of dry brush they had carried from the last oasis. The aroma of smoke and wood and cooking food would fill the air. The traders would tell stories, their voices low and melodic, recounting the tales of those who had gone before them, tales of vanished cities, of spirits that lived in the sand, of the great kings who built pyramids in Nubia long before the pharaohs of Egypt. And they would look up at the stars, and they would know exactly where they were. They would know where tomorrow would lead them. They would know that they were not lost, that they were never truly lost, because the desert was their home. This ability, this deep knowing, was not something you could learn from a book. It was lived. It was passed from father to son, mother to daughter, often in the form of songs and poems that encoded entire routes into a few verses. A trader might sing a song that described the journey from the Nile to the Red Sea, using words that painted pictures in the mind. He would sing of the 3 days to the hill of red stones, then the half day to the well of bitter water, then the turn where the star Sirius sits directly overhead at midnight in the month of the harvest. The song itself was a map, a melody that guided you through the emptiness. You did not need to see the road. You just needed to hear the song. And so, as you lie here in the soft darkness, think of those ancient Nubian traders. Think of them walking slowly, patiently, across a land that seemed to offer no direction. They were not lost. They were always found. They carried the sky in their eyes, the sand in their feet, and the songs of their ancestors in their mouths. They were home, even in the most desolate place on earth. And they did it all without a map, without a compass, without a single device that we would recognize today. They did it by paying attention, by being present, by knowing that the desert, if you listen to it, will always show you the way. Let us pause here in this quiet moment. The caravan is settled for the night. The stars are out. The fire crackles softly. The camels groan in their sleep. The trader looks at the sky one last time, memorizing the pattern of the stars, and then he closes his eyes. Tomorrow he will walk again. Tomorrow he will follow the invisible path. But for now he rests. The desert breathes around him, and the story, just like the journey, continues. And the story, just like the journey, continues. Perhaps you have wondered, as the fire sinks lower and the embers glow like sleepy stars, how these traders managed the long stretches between oases. The Darb el Arbain, the 40 days road, is not a single path, but a corridor of memory, a collection of routes that shifted with the seasons and the winds. The trader did not have a fixed itinerary written on papyrus. He had a mental map that flexed like a living thing, adjusting to the mood of the desert. If a well had dried up, he would know of another, a few miles east, tucked behind a ridge of black basalt. If a sandstorm had buried a familiar landmark, he would find his way by the taste of the air, by the angle of the sun, by the behavior of the birds. Birds, they are a detail that often goes unmentioned in the grand stories of ancient trade. But the Nubian trader watched the birds as closely as he watched the stars. In the morning, before the heat haze rose, he would scan the sky for the flight of the desert lark or the white-crowned wheatear. These small creatures know where water lies, even when the water is hidden beneath the sand. They will fly toward a spring at dawn, and they will return to the same spot at dusk. The trader would note the direction of their flight and adjust his course accordingly. He would also listen for the call of the sand grouse, which famously carries water to its young in its breast feathers. The sound of sand grouse wings beating the air, a soft, rhythmic whisper, was as good as a signpost saying, "Water this way, 2 hours walk." And then there were the insects. It is a strange thing to consider, but the trader paid attention to the location of ant nests. Some species of ants build their mounds with a specific orientation to the sun, a kind of solar architecture that keeps the nest cool in the heat of the day. If you know how to read an ant mound, you can determine north and south with surprising accuracy. The trader did not need to know the precise cardinal directions, but he needed to know that he was still heading toward the next landmark, that he had not drifted off course in the featureless expanse of a gravel plain. The gravel plains, called Sarir, are perhaps the most disorienting terrain of all. No dunes, no rocks, just endless small stones, all the same color, all the same size, stretching to a flat horizon. A compass of ants and birds becomes essential in such a place. You might ask, did they ever get lost? Of course they did. The desert is not a friend to the arrogant. Even the most experienced guide could be tricked by a sudden change in the weather, a prolonged dust storm that blotted out the sun for days, or a mirage that mimicked a real oasis so perfectly that whole caravans were led astray. There are stories, whispered around the campfires, of traders who vanished without a trace, their bones found years later curled up under a thorn tree, their camels wandering wild. But these were not tales of failure. They were warnings, lessons, reminders that the desert demands humility. The good trader is not the one who never gets lost. The good trader is the one who knows how to find his way back when he does. One of the most ingenious methods for preventing disorientation was the use of the sand compass. Not a compass made of magnetized iron, but a simple observation of the sand itself. In the early morning, after the wind has died down, the surface of the sand is marked with tiny ripples, called ripples because they look like the ripples on a pond, only they are made of sand. These ripples are aligned perpendicular to the wind that created them. If you know the prevailing wind direction for that season, you can use the ripples as a rough guide. The trader would set his course at an angle to the ripples and walk. He would check his direction after an hour by looking at the shadows of the dunes, by noticing which side of a rock is covered in lichen, by tasting the salt content of the air. It is a constant, quiet conversation between the body and the land. Let us also consider the role of the Nile. Great River is the spine of the ancient world, and the Nubian traders used it as a reference point, a lifeline, a source of water and food. But the desert routes often ran parallel to the Nile, sometimes 100 miles away, sometimes just a day's journey. The trader would know the distance to the river by the type of vegetation he encountered. A patch of acacia trees meant the water table was high. A patch of tamarisk meant salt. The presence of date palms, even wild ones, meant an oasis was near. He would also know the river by the smell. The Nile has a smell, especially at dawn, a smell of mud and green growing things, a smell that carries on the breeze for miles. A trader walking in the desert would lift his head, sniff the air, and say, "We are close to the river now," and the whole caravan would pick up its pace. And what of the people they met along the way? The Nubian traders were not alone. They traveled in caravans that could include dozens, even hundreds of camels. But they also encountered other travelers, other traders, nomads, herders, pilgrims. These encounters were often planned. There were meeting points, known to all, where different groups would converge to exchange news, trade goods, and share information about the state of the roads. Has the well at Bur gone dry? Is there a group of bandits operating near the pass of the Broken Rock? These were the questions that passed from mouth to mouth, carried like the goods themselves. The desert was a network of voices, a web of whispers, and the trader who listened was the trader who survived. One particular meeting point was the oasis of Selima, a small green dot in the vastness of the Libyan desert. It was not a grand place. A few palm trees, a shallow well, a cluster of mud brick huts. But for the trader walking the 40 days road, Selima was a landmark of the soul. It marked the halfway point, the place where you could rest, refill your water skins, and take stock of your journey. The water at Selima is bitter, high in minerals, but it is wet, and that is enough. A trader would arrive at Selima with sand in his teeth and his throat lined with dust. He would lower the leather bucket into the well, draw up the cool, murky water, and drink. He would lie down in the thin shade of a palm tree, and he would listen to the rustle of the fronds, and he would feel, for a moment, that the desert was not so vast after all. The Nubian traders also carried with them something that we might not think of as a navigation tool, but it was perhaps the most powerful of all. They carried stories. Every rock, every dry riverbed, every distant mesa had a story attached to it. This is where the lion of the West was killed by a hero of the old days. This is where the twin stars fell to earth and became two springs. This is where the ghost of a trader walks, still searching for his lost camel. These stories gave the landscape meaning. They turned the empty desert into a living tapestry, a realm of memory and myth. When you walk through a world that is thick with stories, you cannot be lost. You are always somewhere, and that somewhere has a name and a purpose. Consider the way the traders used the stars. We often think of celestial navigation as a science, a matter of angles and calculations. But for the Nubian trader, it was more like a conversation. He knew the constellations by their shapes and their behaviors, but he also knew them by their seasonal appearances. The star Sirius, the brightest star in the sky, rises just before the sun in the summer, marking the beginning of the Nile flood. The trader would look for Sirius and know that the season of travel was about to change. The stars of the Big Dipper, which the ancient Egyptians called the hippopotamus, circled the northern sky without setting, providing a constant reference. The trader would memorize the position of certain stars relative to landmarks. That star will be directly above the hill of the crouching lion when the moon is new. That star will touch the horizon just as the first light of dawn appears. These were the rules of the road, written in light. And there was also the moon. The trader would plan his journeys around the phases of the moon. A full moon provides enough light to travel by night when the desert is cool and the stars are brilliant. Many caravans would march through the night, the camels' footsteps creating a soft, rhythmic padding on the sand. The trader would look up at the moon, its face cratered and silver, and he would feel a kinship with all the generations who had walked under that same light. The moon does not care about the passage of centuries. It is the same moon today for all of us as it was for those traders. It is a comforting thought, especially when you are lying in the dark, listening to the wind. We must also remember that the Nubian traders were not just moving goods. They were moving ideas. Along with the gold and the ivory and the frankincense, they carried news of distant kingdoms, of art and architecture, of gods and rituals. The desert routes were channels of culture. A Nubian trader might bring a new style of pottery from the south, a design of spirals and dots that had never been seen in Egypt. He might bring a song, a melody that would be adapted by musicians along the Nile. He might bring a story, a tale of a clever rabbit or a wise king that would spread from oasis to oasis, changing slightly with each telling. The trader was a messenger, a bridge between worlds, and he did not need a map to make that connection. He needed only the courage to step into the unknown, one foot after the other. Let us drift now, deeper into the night. The caravan is quiet. The fire has burned down to a heap of glowing coals. One of the traders, an old man with a face like cracked leather, is still awake. He is looking at the sky, tracing the path of the Milky Way with his finger. He is thinking about his first journey decades ago, when he was a boy of 12, walking beside his father. He remembers being afraid of the dark, afraid of the emptiness, afraid that he would never see his home again. His father had put a hand on his shoulder and said, "Look at the stars, son. They are the same stars that your grandfather saw, and his father before him. They will never lead you wrong." That boy is now old, and he is passing that same comfort to the younger members of the caravan, the ones who are still learning to read the desert. He tells them, "Do not be afraid. The desert is not your enemy. It is your teacher. It will show you who you are." And so, as you lie here, wrapped in the quiet of your own room, let that thought settle into your bones. The desert is vast, but so is the human spirit. The Nubian traders crossed hundreds of miles of nothing, and they did it with nothing but their senses, their memories, and their trust in the world around them. They found their way not by conquering the desert, but by listening to it. They let the stars speak. They let the sand guide them. They let the camels lead. And they arrived, always, at the place they intended to go. The journey is not over. There are still many miles ahead. But for now, the caravan rests. The fire whispers. The stars wheel overhead. And the trader closes his eyes, knowing that when he opens them again, the desert will be waiting, ready to show him the way once more. The trader closes his eyes, and the desert holds its breath. Sleep comes slowly, not with a rush, but like the turning of the great sky wheel above. One by one, the coals die down to ash. The camels settle, their long legs folded beneath them, their heads nodding into a state of half-wakefulness. Even the wind seems to pause, as if listening for something far away. And in that stillness, the night becomes a single, vast heartbeat, steady and deep. The old man, whose name might have been Seneb, or perhaps it was Ka, a name lost to the sand now, dozes lightly. His dreams are not of gold or of distant markets. They are of water. He dreams of a spring he visited once as a young man, a spring that bubbled up from a crack in a black rock, surrounded by ferns and wild mint. He can almost taste the coolness of it, the way it made his whole body feel new. But that spring is many days' journey from where he lies now, and he knows he will not see it again. Still, the memory is enough. It is a kind of map, drawn not on leather or papyrus, but on the inside of his eyelids. When dawn comes, it comes softly, as it always does in the desert. First, a hint of gray, then a wash of rose, then the pale blue that slowly deepens into the clear sky of day. The trader opens his eyes and lies still for a moment, listening. There is the sound of a camel shifting its weight, the cough of another waking, the gentle murmur of voices as the younger men stir the fire back to life. The world smells of dust and smoke and the faint sweetness of dried dates. It is the smell of home, though home is far away. The ritual of packing is as old as the caravan itself. Each load must be balanced, each rope tightened just so. A poorly tied load can shift during the day and cause a camel to stumble. A stumble can lead to injury, and injury in the desert is a slow and serious matter. So the traders work with care, their hands moving in patterns learned from childhood. The younger ones watch the older ones. They learn by doing, by making mistakes, and being corrected with a gentle word or a nod of the head. There is no rush. The desert is patient, and those who live in it must learn patience too. The route today will take them along the edge of a dry riverbed, a wadi that only flows with water a few days each year, after the rare rains that fall in the mountains far to the south. But those rains are unpredictable. The wadi may be dry for years at a time, yet its shape is still visible, a winding scar in the landscape, with occasional clusters of tamarisk and acacia trees that mark where the water has sunk deep into the ground. The traders follow the wadi not because it leads directly to any known well, but because it provides a natural path, a corridor through the broken terrain. The camels know this too. They set off without hesitation, following the faint trail that generations of their ancestors have walked. The sun climbs higher. The air shimmers. The heat presses down like a great hand. The traders wrap their heads in cloth, leaving only a slit for their eyes. They walk with a rolling gait, a rhythm that conserves energy. The camels sway, their bells clinking softly, a sound that is as familiar as breathing. The miles pass without measure, without any marker but the changing shadows. The trader does not count the steps. He simply moves and lets the world move around him. At midday, they stop. The camels are made to kneel, and the traders spread a cloth on the ground for shade. There's a little water passed from hand to hand, a few dates, a piece of dried meat chewed slowly. No one speaks much. The heat makes speech seem wasteful, an exertion of energy that could be used for walking. Instead, they listen to the sound of the wind moving over the sand, a low, continuous sigh. It is the sound of the desert breathing, and if you listen long enough, you can hear patterns in it, changes in pitch that tell of a change in the terrain ahead. A hum that means a dune is near, a whistle that means a ridge of rock. The wind is a language, and the old trader has spent a lifetime learning its words. In the afternoon, they see a distant smudge on the horizon. It is a caravan coming from the opposite direction. Two lines of camels, small as ants, but growing slowly larger. The traders do not change their pace. They do not wave or shout. They simply continue, and when the two groups meet, they stop and exchange greetings in the customary way. There is no rush in the desert. A greeting can take an hour, from the first salam to the sharing of news to the trading of small items. A piece of cloth for a handful of salt. A carving of a scarab for a pouch of medicinal herbs. These exchanges are not about profit. They are about maintaining the web of relationships that makes travel possible. The face of the other trader is studied, his words remembered, his warnings and suggestions passed along to the next group they meet. One of the travelers says that the well at Bur el Khatara has been blocked by a rock slide. He had to dig for nearly a day to find enough water for his camels. This is valuable information. The old trader files it away. He will adjust his route accordingly, perhaps take a longer but safer path to a different well. He thanks the traveler and offers him a piece of dried fish, a delicacy from the Nile. The traveler accepts with a nod, and the two groups part, each continuing in their own direction. The desert is wide, but it is also small, held together by these threads of conversation. As the sun begins to sink, the colors change. The sand turns gold, then orange, then a deep, bruised purple. The shadows stretch out long and thin, like fingers reaching for something. The traders find a place to camp, a flat area near a cluster of rocks that will provide some shelter from the wind. They unload the camels, build a fire, and settle into the evening routine. The old trader sits apart, as he often does, and looks at the sky. The first stars are appearing, faint at first, then brighter as the darkness deepens. He remembers a story his father told him, a story about a star that fell to earth and became a woman. She wandered the desert, searching for her lost lover, and wherever she stepped, a spring appeared. The wells of the Nubian desert, his father said, are the footprints of a grieving star. It is a sad tale, but it is also a tale of hope, for it reminds the traveler that water can be found in the most unexpected places, that the desert holds secrets that are both beautiful and terrible. The old trader smiles, a thin, cracked smile. He knows the story is not true, not in the literal sense, but in another sense, it is true because it helps him remember where the wells are. He has been to many of them, and each one has its own story, its own character. Some are deep and cold, others are shallow and warm. Some taste of iron, others of limestone. He knows them all by name, as one knows old friends. The night deepens. The fire crackles. A young trader, a boy of perhaps 16, sits down beside the old man. He is nervous, full of questions. He has been walking for only a few weeks, and the desert still frightens him. He asks the old trader, "How do you know where we are going? How do you know that we are not walking in circles?" The old trader looks at him, his eyes reflecting the firelight. He does not answer immediately. He picks up a handful of sand and lets it fall slowly through his fingers. Then he says, "The desert is not a place of straight lines. It is a place of circles. The sun circles the sky. The moon circles the earth. The stars circle the pole. We are walking in a circle too, a very big circle that takes us from the land of the Nile to the land of the gold and back again. But we are not lost because we know the circle. We know its shape, its rhythm, its markers. We are part of the circle, and the circle is part of us." The boy considers this. He looks at the sky. He sees the familiar constellations, the ones his father taught him. The Great Bear, the one that never sets. The Sword of Orion, the pointer to the south. The bright star Sirius, the bringer of the flood. and he begins to understand. The sky is a map, and the earth is a map, and they are the same map, drawn in different materials. You only need to learn how to read it. The old trader goes on. He tells the boy about the camel's nose, how it can smell water from miles away. He tells him about the dung beetles and how their direction changes when there is moisture in the soil. He tells him about the birds that fly toward the river at dusk and away from it at dawn. He tells him about the taste of the wind, how it changes when it has passed over a place where water lies hidden. The boy listens, and his fear begins to fade. He is not alone. He is connected to everything around him, to the sand, to the stars, to the animals, to the old man who has walked these paths for 40 years. He is part of a family that stretches back through time, a family of traders who have crossed the desert since before the pyramids were built. And he will pass this knowledge on to his own children and to theirs. The night is deep and still. The fire has burned low. The old trader and the boy sit together in silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. The world is quiet, save for the breathing of the camels and the distant howl of a jackal, a sound that travels across the dark plain like a thread of silver. The desert is not empty. It is full of voices if you know how to listen. And tonight, the boy is learning to listen. The journey continues in the morning, as it always does. The sun rises, the camels are loaded, the caravan moves on. But something has changed. The boy walks with a different step, a lighter step. He sees the landscape not as a maze, but as a story. He sees the stars not as distant lights, but as guides. He sees the old trader not as a man, but as a living map. And so the caravan winds its way through the valleys and over the ridges, past the red cliffs and the white salt pans, under the vast blue canopy of the sky. The miles pass, and the days pass, and the seasons pass, but the knowledge remains, carried in the minds and the hearts of those who walk the long road. It is a quiet knowledge, a knowledge that does not need to be written down. It is felt in the bones. It is heard in the wind. It is seen in the stars. And you, lying here in the soft darkness of your room, you are a part of that knowledge too. You have walked with the traders tonight across the sands of time. Their footsteps echo in your imagination. Their stories have found a home in your mind. And when you close your eyes, you can see the desert stretching out before you, endless and beautiful. And you know that you will never be lost as long as you remember to look up. The stars are still there, and they are still guiding. The camels are still walking, and the bells are still ringing, soft and steady, like a heartbeat, like a song, like a promise. Sleep now, and let the caravan carry you through the night. But the caravan does not stop when you sleep. It continues its ancient journey, and in the quiet of your dreams, you might find yourself walking alongside the traders once more. The sand shifts beneath your feet, soft and warm, and the bells of the camels sound like distant rainfall. You are not a stranger here. You are a traveler like all the others who have come before. Let us imagine another day, another trader. This one is not old. He is young, perhaps 20 summers, and he is making his first journey alone. His father has sent him to carry a message to the governor of a distant oasis, a place called Selima, which lies far to the west, where the desert meets the sea of sand. The young man is nervous, but he does not show it. He has learned from watching his father and from listening to the stories of the old ones. He knows that confidence is a kind of map, a map that others can read and trust. He sets out at dawn with 3 camels and a single guide, a man named Bashir, who has crossed the desert more times than he can count. Bashir is silent by nature, but his silence is not cold. It is the silence of someone who has learned to listen to the world. He does not chatter. He observes. He notes the position of the sun, the direction of the wind, the color of the sand. He reads the world like a book, and every page tells him something. The first day is easy. They follow a wadi, a dry riverbed that winds through low hills. The ground is firm, and the camels move at a steady pace. The young trader watches the horizon, looking for any sign of danger. But there is none. Only the slow, patient rhythm of the walk. As night falls, they camp in the shelter of a rock outcrop. Bashir builds a fire, small and careful, so that it will not be seen from far away. He says that there are bandits in these parts, men who would steal the camels and leave the travelers to die. He says it without fear, as if stating a fact about the weather. The young trader feels a chill run through him. He has heard stories of bandits, but he has never faced them. He wonders if he will be brave enough. Bashir sees his worry and smiles. He says, "Do not be afraid. The bandits are not fools. They know that a lone traveler is not worth the risk. They look for caravans, for riches. You and I have nothing but water and dates and a message. That is not enough to make them attack. But even if they did, you would fight. You are a son of the desert. You have the blood of warriors in your veins." The young trader nods, though he is not sure he believes it. He eats his meal of dates and bread and drinks his water slowly, savoring each sip. Then he lies down on his blanket and looks up at the stars. They seem closer here, brighter, as if they are hanging just above his head. He picks out the constellation that his grandfather called the Camel's Hump, a group of stars that points toward the north. He follows its line with his eyes, and he feels a sense of peace. The second day is harder. The wadi ends, and they must cross a broad plain of gravel and stone. The sun beats down, and the heat shimmers off the ground. The camels begin to slow. The young trader feels his throat growing dry, and he forces himself to drink, though the water is warm and tastes of leather. He thinks about the message he carries, a message that might change the fate of his village. It is about a dispute over water rights, a quarrel that could turn into violence if not resolved. His father has trusted him to deliver the words, and he does not want to fail. Bashir notices his distress and says, "The message is important, but it is not more important than you. If you die, the message dies with you. So take care of yourself first. The message will wait. It is only words. Words can be written again. A life cannot." The young trader nods, understanding. He slows his pace, matching the rhythm of the camels. He begins to pay more attention to his body, to the signs of thirst and fatigue. He learns to listen to himself as Bashir listens to the desert. On the third day, they see a speck in the sky, a vulture circling. Bashir says, "That is a good sign. It means there is water nearby." The vulture knows where the animals come to drink. They follow the vulture's path, and after an hour, they find a small spring hidden in a cleft of rock. The water is clear and cold. The young trader drinks until his stomach is full, and then he fills his skins. He feels a surge of gratitude, not for the water, but for the vulture, for the bird that showed them the way. He looks at Bashir and says, "I see now. The desert teaches you to trust everything. The stars, the birds, the wind, even the vultures." Bashir laughs, a low, rumbling sound. He says, "Yes, but only if you are humble enough to learn." The desert has no patience for pride. On the fourth day, they reach the oasis of Selima. It is a cluster of palm trees, a dozen huts, a small mosque made of mud brick. The governor is a tall man with a gray beard and kind eyes. He receives the young trader with courtesy, listens to the message, and writes a reply. He offers food and shelter for the night. That evening, as the sun sets, the young trader sits by the pool in the center of the oasis, watching the water reflect the colors of the sky. He thinks about the journey he has made, the dangers he has faced, the lessons he has learned. He feels older now, not in years, but in spirit. He has crossed the desert, and the desert has crossed him. He returns home the same way, but the journey feels different. He recognizes the landmarks now. He knows when to turn, when to rest, when to push on. He no longer needs to rely on Bashir for everything. He can read the wind for himself. He can find water by the flight of birds. He can navigate by the stars. When he arrives back at his village, his father embraces him. The father does not ask about the message or the governor. He asks only one question: "Did you see the stars?" The young trader says, "Yes, father, I saw them. And they saw me." His father nods. That is enough. And so the knowledge is passed from one generation to the next, not in books or scrolls, but in the quiet moments between travelers. It is a knowledge that is alive, that breathes and changes, that adapts to each new journey. It is not static. It is as fluid as the sand, as constant as the stars. The young trader grows older, and he becomes the old trader that we met earlier. He leads caravans across the desert, from the Nile to the Red Sea, from the gold mines of the eastern desert to the spice markets of the south. He carries not only goods, but also stories. The stories of the people he has met, the places he has seen, the dangers he has survived. He becomes a living archive, a library of the desert. One night, many years later, he sits by a fire in a camp near the frontier of Egypt. A young boy, his grandson, sits beside him. The boy is about 7 years old, with wide eyes and a curious heart. He asks the old trader, "Grandfather, what is the most important thing you have learned in all your travels?" The old trader does not answer right away. He looks into the fire, watching the flames dance. Then he says, "The most important thing is this: the desert is not a thing to be conquered. It is a thing to be respected. You cannot force it. You cannot rush it. You cannot trick it. You can only move with it like water moves with the river. If you try to fight the desert, you will lose. But if you learn to flow with it, it will carry you to where you need to go. The boy thinks about this. He says, "But how do you learn to flow?" The old trader smiles. He says, "You learn by walking. You learn by falling and getting up. You learn by getting lost and finding your way again. You learn by listening. And you learn by remembering that you are not the first to walk this path. There are footprints beneath your feet, footprints that are thousands of years old. You are not alone. You never have been. You are part of a long, slow river of people, all moving together, all heading toward the same distant horizon." The boy looks down at the sand. He imagines the footprints, invisible but real, pressed into the earth by countless travelers over countless centuries. He feels a connection, a thread that ties him to the past and to the future. He knows that one day he too will walk these paths, and that his own footprints will join those of his ancestors. And so the caravan continues across the generations, across the centuries. The camels change, the goods change, the languages change, but the knowledge remains. It is passed from hand to hand, from mouth to ear, from star to eye. It is a gift that never grows old, a light that never goes out. And you, lying here in the quiet of your room, you are a part of that caravan too. Not as a trader, perhaps, but as a traveler of the mind. You have journeyed with us tonight across the sands of time, and you have seen the stars as the Nubian traders saw them, as guides and friends. You have learned that the desert is not a place of emptiness, but a place of fullness, a place where every grain of sand holds a story, every star holds a direction, every breath of wind holds a message. So rest now. Let the echoes of the camel bells fade into the distance. Let the images of the red cliffs and the blue sky soften into dreams. The caravan has reached its camp, and you are safe within its circle. The fire is warm, the stars are bright, and the night is deep and long. Tomorrow the journey continues. But for now, there is only stillness, only peace. The old trader has told his story, and the boy has heard it. And you have heard it too. Sleep well, and may the memory of the Nubian desert guide you through the night. The old trader's words hang in the air like smoke from the fire, curling upward into the darkness. The boy does not speak. He does not need to. His silence is full, not empty. It is the silence of someone who has heard something true, something that will stay with him for the rest of his life. The fire crackles softly, and a log shifts, sending a shower of sparks into the night. The old trader reaches out and places a hand on his grandson's shoulder. It is a simple gesture, but it says more than any speech. It says, "I was once you, and you will one day be me." The night grows deeper, and the stars seem to move slowly, as if they are turning on a great wheel. The old trader points to the sky once more, this time to a cluster of stars that looks like a man carrying a staff. He says, "The Greeks called that Orion, the hunter. But my grandfather called it the walking man, because it walks across the sky all night, never stopping, never resting." It reminds us that the journey is never over. Even when you reach your destination, there is always another destination beyond it. The boy yawns, but he fights to keep his eyes open. He does not want to miss a single word. He knows that these stories are precious, that they are the treasures his grandfather carries, more valuable than gold or ivory. He asks, "Grandfather, did you ever get lost? I mean, truly lost, where you thought you might never find your way back?" The old trader's face grows thoughtful. He pokes the fire with a stick, and a flame leaps up, illuminating the lines of his face, the deep grooves that the desert has carved into his skin. He says, "Once, when I was younger than you are now, I was sent to fetch water from a spring that was about an hour's walk from our camp. I had been there many times before. I knew the path. But on that day, a sandstorm came up suddenly, without warning. It was like a wall of brown dust, rising from the horizon and swallowing everything. I could not see my hand in front of my face. I crouched down and covered my mouth and nose with my cloak. I waited. I thought it would pass quickly, as sandstorms often do. But it did not pass. It went on for hours. When the storm finally cleared, I did not know where I was. The landscape had changed. The dunes had shifted. The rocks I had used as markers were buried. The sun was low in the sky, and I could not tell which direction was home. I was alone. I was afraid. I was a boy of about 9 years, and I thought I would die there, parched and forgotten, my bones bleached by the sun and scattered by the wind. The boy listens, his eyes wide. He asks, "What did you do?" The old trader says, "I sat down. I sat down on the sand, and I cried. I cried because I was scared, and I cried because I was angry, and I cried because I missed my mother's cooking. Then, when my tears were spent, I remembered what my own grandfather had told me. He had said, 'The desert does not want to kill you. It wants you to learn.' So I asked myself, what can I learn from this? And the answer came to me. I can learn to be still. I can learn to wait. I can learn to trust that the desert will show me the way if I only give it time." So I sat still. I watched the sun as it sank toward the horizon. I watched the colors change from gold to orange to red to purple. I watched the first stars appear, one by one, like lamps being lit in a vast house. And I found the North Star. I found it because I knew where to look. My grandfather had shown me. He had said, "When you are lost, look for the star that does not move. That is your anchor. That is your home." And so I walked toward the North Star. I walked for 3 hours, through the darkness, over dunes, across flat plains of cracked earth. And eventually, I saw the glow of a campfire in the distance. It was my own camp. My family had lit a beacon, hoping that I would see it. I walked into the circle of firelight, and my mother rushed to me and held me. She did not scold me. She did not ask why I had taken so long. She only held me, and she cried. He looks at his grandson. He says, "I learned that the stars are not just guides, they are friends. They are constant. They are reliable. They do not lie." And I learned that being lost is not a failure. It is a lesson. It is the desert's way of teaching you to pay attention, to be humble, to trust. The boy is silent for a long moment. Then he says, "Grandfather, I think I understand." So the desert is a teacher, not an enemy. The old trader nods. He says, "Yes." And it teaches everyone, whether they want to learn or not. It teaches the proud and the humble, the rich and the poor, the young and the old. It does not discriminate. It offers its lessons to all who enter its domain. The only question is whether you are willing to receive them. The fire begins to die down, and the boy's eyelids grow heavy. The old trader notices and says gently, "It is time to sleep. Tomorrow, we will walk to the next oasis. It is a half-day's journey, and the way is beautiful. We will pass through a valley of orange sandstone, where the cliffs rise like the walls of a great temple. There are ancient carvings on those cliffs, carvings of people and animals and symbols that no one can fully explain. They are messages from the past, left by travelers who came long before us. And when you see them, you will feel a connection to all those who have walked that valley before you." The boy lies down on a mat of woven palm leaves, and the old trader covers him with a woolen blanket. The boy's eyes close, and his breathing slows. The old trader sits beside him, watching the stars wheel overhead. He thinks about the many journeys he has made, the many nights he has spent under this same sky, the many stories he has told and heard. He thinks about the vast network of roots that crisscross the desert, like veins in a great living body, carrying the lifeblood of trade and connection. These roots are not just lines on a map. They are threads woven into the fabric of history. They are the paths along which ideas traveled, along which religions spread, along which languages mingled and changed. The Nubian traders who walked these routes were not just merchants, they were messengers, ambassadors, storytellers. They carried with them the culture of their homeland and brought back the culture of distant lands. They were the bridges between worlds, and they knew that the desert, for all its dangers, was also a place of beauty. They knew the smell of acacia wood burning in a campfire. They knew the taste of dates eaten by starlight. They knew the sound of camel bells in the distance, a sound that meant a caravan was approaching, that there were people nearby, that they were not alone. They knew the feeling of relief when they saw the green smudge of an oasis on the horizon, a promise of shade and water and rest. One of the most famous of these oases is the Wadi El Natron, a series of salt lakes that lie about 60 miles northwest of the Nile. In ancient times, it was a source of natron, a mineral used in glassmaking and embalming. The Nubian traders would stop there to trade salt and glass for gold and myrrh. But they also stopped there to tell stories. The Wadi El Natron was a crossroads, a meeting place, a hub of exchange. Goods changed hands, but so did news, gossip, poems, legends, and jokes. The camels rested, the men mended their gear, and the children played in the shallow water of the lakes. It was a place of life in the midst of the dead, dry land. The old trader remembers one such stop when he was a young man about the age of his grandson. He was traveling with a group of traders from Kush, the southern Nubian kingdom. They had been on the road for 2 weeks, and they were tired and dusty. When they saw the palm trees of the Wadi El Natron rising from the haze, the men cheered. The camels perked up their ears and quickened their pace. They reached the oasis by midday, and they set up camp in a grove of date palms. The water of the lake was not drinkable, too salty, but there were freshwater springs nearby. The men washed the dust from their bodies and their clothes. They sat in the shade and shared a meal of flatbread and lentils and dried fish. They laughed and argued and told tales. One of the older traders, a man named Karam, began to tell a story about a spirit of the desert called the Sand Father. According to Karam, the Sand Father was a giant made of dust and wind and rock. He lived in the deepest part of the desert, where no man had ever gone. He had no eyes, but he could see everything. He had no ears, but he could hear everything. He had no mouth, but he could speak in the voice of the wind. He was not malevolent, but he was not friendly either. He was simply there, a force of nature, a manifestation of the desert itself. Karam said, "You must never show fear when you feel the Sand Father's presence. Fear is like a scent to him. It draws him closer. Instead, you must remain calm and still, the way the sand is calm and still when there is no wind. You must acknowledge him with respect, but not with terror. You must say in your heart, 'Sand Father, I am a traveler on your land. I ask only for passage. I mean no harm, and he will let you pass.'" The other traders nodded. Some of them had felt the presence of the Sand Father themselves, or so they claimed. They told stories of strange sounds in the night, of swirls of dust that seemed to form human shapes, of a heavy silence that felt like hands pressing down on them. But they also told stories of protection, of times when the Sand Father had guided them to water or warned them of a coming storm. He was not to be feared, but to be respected, like the desert itself. The young trader listened to these stories with fascination. He asked Karam, "Have you ever seen the Sand Father with your own eyes?" Karam smiled. He said, "I have seen him with my heart, and that is enough. If he wants to show himself, he will. But be careful what you ask for. Seeing a thing and understanding a thing are not always the same." The old trader, now telling this story to the sleeping boy, remembers that moment clearly. He remembers the feeling of the cool shade, the smell of the lentils, the sound of camel bells in the distance. He remembers the weight of the stories, how they settled into his mind like seeds waiting to sprout. And he understands now that those stories were more than entertainment. They were a form of knowing. They were a way of passing on wisdom, of teaching the next generation how to navigate the desert, both physically and spiritually. He looks at his grandson, whose face is peaceful in sleep. He knows that one day this boy will have his own stories to tell. He will have his own experiences of the desert, his own encounters with the Sand Father, his own journeys across the sand. And he will pass those stories on to his own children, or to strangers by the fire, or to anyone who will listen. That is how knowledge survives. That is how the caravan continues. The night is quiet now. The fire has burned down to embers, glowing like the eyes of some sleeping creature. The old trader wraps himself in his blanket and lies down near his grandson. He looks up at the stars, and he thinks about the countless generations that have looked at the same stars in the same desert, with the same mixture of wonder and trust. He feels a kinship with them, a connection that transcends time and space. He is not just an old man lying on the sand. He is part of a vast, ancient caravan that stretches from the beginning of history to the end of time. He closes his eyes. He listens to the wind, which sounds like a low, slow song, a lullaby played on an instrument made of sand and sky. He breathes deeply. He lets his thoughts drift like dust in the breeze. He sees images from his life, the faces of his parents, the palm trees of the oasis, the red cliffs of the valley, the black tents of the Bedouin, the green ribbons of the Nile, the endless gold of the desert. All of these images are woven together like threads in a tapestry, forming a picture of a life lived in movement, a life lived in connection with the land and the sky and the people. And you, who are lying in your own quiet room, you are part of this tapestry too. You may never have crossed the Nubian desert. You may never have ridden a camel or followed a star or tasted the water of a hidden spring. But you have traveled with the traders tonight, through the stories, through the imagination. You have walked where they walked, seen what they saw, felt what they felt. You have learned a little of what they knew. So let that wisdom settle into you as softly as sand settling after a storm. Let it become part of your own inner landscape. When you close your eyes, see the stars above the desert. Hear the bells of the caravan. Feel the warmth of the fire and the cool of the night. And know that you are not alone. You are part of a long, slow river of human experience, flowing through time, carrying the knowledge of the past into the future. The old trader is asleep now. The boy is asleep. The fire is only a whisper of light. The desert stretches out around them, vast and silent, holding them in its ancient embrace. The stars keep their watch, as they have done for millennia, as they will do for millennia to come. And the caravan, in its many forms, continues. The journey never truly ends. It simply changes. Sleep now. Let the quiet take you. The desert is patient, and the stars are kind. And so the night passed, as nights in the desert have always passed, slow and deep and full of dreams. The old trader slept without moving, his body a small mound of stillness beside the embers. The boy dreamed of camels that flew, of rivers of milk and honey, of the sand father speaking in a voice like the rustle of dry leaves. And the stars turned overhead, unhurried, as if they had all the time in the world, which of course they did. Just before dawn, a cool breeze stirred the ashes. The old trader opened his eyes, not with a start, but with the easy, natural waking of someone who has slept well and knows there is no hurry. He lay still for a moment, listening. The world was quiet, the way it always is in the hour before the sun breaks the horizon. The birds were silent. The camels, hobbled and resting, breathed in long, slow breaths. The air smelled of dry earth and the faint, clean scent of the night. He sat up slowly, stretching his arms and feeling the familiar stiffness in his knees. He was not as young as he used to be, but he was not old enough to complain. Not yet. He looked at his grandson, still asleep, his mouth slightly open, his hand clutching the edge of the blanket. The boy had kicked off his coverings in the night, as boys often do. The old trader reached over and pulled the blanket back up, tucking it gently around the boy's shoulders. The boy murmured something, a word or two from a dream, and then settled deeper into sleep. The old trader smiled. There was no greater treasure than a sleeping child, safe and warm and unworried. He got up and walked a few steps away from the camp, toward a low dune that rose just beyond the palm grove. He climbed it slowly, his feet sinking into the soft sand, his breath even. At the top, he stood and looked out at the desert. The light was just beginning to change. The sky was a pale, milky blue, with a few faint stars still visible near the western edge. The sand stretched away in gentle waves, like the surface of a vast, golden sea that had been frozen in time. He could see the tracks of their own caravan from the day before, a dark line that led back into the horizon. He could also see the tracks of other travelers, older tracks, some of them partially erased by the wind. Each one was a story, a journey, a life moving from one place to another. He thought about the many mornings he had stood on such a dune, watching the sun rise over the desert. It never got old. The light would begin as a thin orange line, then spread like water, turning the sand from gray to pink to gold. The shadows would lengthen, then shrink. The air would warm, and the desert would come alive in its own quiet way. A lizard would dart from under a rock. A beetle would emerge from its burrow. The birds would begin their chatter from the trees of the oasis. It was a gentle awakening, a calm beginning to the long day ahead. He remembered his first sunrise alone in the desert. He had been about the same age as his grandson, perhaps a little older. He had begged his father to let him lead the caravan for a day, just one day. His father had looked at him with a mixture of pride and concern, then nodded. He had given him the responsibility of choosing the direction, of watching the stars, of listening to the wind. The boy had been terrified and thrilled at the same time. He had spent the night unable to sleep, worrying that he would make a mistake, that he would lead the whole caravan astray. But his father had taught him carefully. He knew how to read the stars, how to find the North Star, how to watch the movement of the constellations. He knew how to feel the wind on his cheeks, how to tell if it was shifting. He knew how to look at the shape of the dunes, how to find the low places where the ground was hard and safe for the camels. And that morning, when the sun rose, he had felt a surge of confidence. He had seen the path, not with his eyes alone, but with his whole being. The desert had seemed like an old friend, a wise and patient companion. He had led the caravan that entire day without faltering, and when they reached the next oasis, his father had placed a hand on his shoulder and said nothing. But the silence was full of praise. It was one of the best days of his life. He came down from the dune and returned to the camp. The other members of the caravan were stirring. A woman was tending the fire, adding a few dry sticks and blowing gently until the flames caught. She was the wife of one of the younger traders, and she had been traveling with them for years. She knew the desert as well as any man. She could read the tracks of animals, could tell you whether a jackal had passed by hours ago or days ago. She knew which plants were good for an upset stomach, which roots could be chewed to stave off thirst. She was small and quiet, but her eyes missed nothing. The old trader greeted her with a nod. She nodded back and handed him a clay cup filled with warm water, with a few mint leaves floating on top. He sipped it slowly, letting the warmth spread through him. He watched as the camp came to life. The camels were being unhobbled and led to the spring for a drink. The children, including his grandson, were waking up, rubbing their eyes and yawning. The traders were checking their packs, tightening straps, mending any small tears in the cloth. There was a rhythm to it, a practiced routine that had been passed down for generations. Nobody needed to be told what to do. Everyone knew their role. By the time the sun had risen fully, the camp was packed and ready to move. The old trader helped his grandson onto a camel, climbing onto the one behind him. The boy was still a little groggy, but he perked up when he saw a group of gazelles bounding across the sand in the distance. He pointed, and the old trader nodded. Gazelles were good luck, he said. They meant that water was near, or at least that the land was not completely barren. The boy watched them until they disappeared behind a dune, and then he settled into the rhythm of the ride. The caravan moved slowly, as always. There was no rush. The desert punished haste. If you pushed too hard, you risked injuring the camels, or overheating yourself, or missing a subtle sign that could keep you safe. The key was patience, steady pacing, and constant attention. The old trader had learned that lesson many times, sometimes painfully. Once, when he was young and arrogant, he had insisted on continuing through a sandstorm, thinking he could outrun it. He had nearly lost 2 camels and a man. The man survived, but with a broken leg that never healed properly. After that, the young trader had learned to respect the storm. He had learned to stop, to hunker down, to wait. The desert would not be rushed. As they rode, the old trader pointed out things to his grandson, the same things his own father had pointed out to him. See that rock, shaped like a camel's head? It marks a place where an old well lies, about a day's journey to the south. The well is dry now, but it was once a busy stop. See the way the sand changes color over there, from yellow to a reddish hue. That means there is iron in the ground. The traders used to mine it to make tools and weapons. See that bird circling high above? It is a vulture waiting for something to die. But do not be afraid. The vulture only takes what is already gone. He is part of the cycle, like the wind and the sun. The boy listened, his eyes wide. He asked questions, some of them simple, some of them surprisingly deep. Why does the sand feel different in the morning than at noon? Why do the stars look closer in the winter? How do the camels know where to go even when the wind covers the tracks? The old trader answered each one as best he could, sometimes with a fact, sometimes with a story. He did not pretend to know everything. He said, I have been traveling these routes for more than 60 years, and I still learn new things. The desert is like a book that never ends. Every time you open it, you find a page you have never seen before. They passed through a stretch of land where the sand was dotted with black stones, smooth and shiny, as if polished by the wind. The old trader told the boy that these stones were called desert glass. They were made, some said, by lightning striking the sand, or by the heat of a falling star. The Nubian traders used to collect them and trade them as ornaments. The boy wanted to stop and pick one up, but the old trader shook his head. "We have a long way to go today," he said, "but I will tell you a secret. If you find a stone that is perfectly clear, like a piece of frozen water, you should keep it. It is said to bring good luck to travelers." The boy looked around eagerly, but soon gave up, satisfied with the promise of future treasure. The sun climbed higher, and the heat grew. The traders wrapped their heads in cloth, leaving only a slit for their eyes. The camels plodded on, their large feet moving with a steady, soft padding sound. The world became a haze of light and dust. The old trader found himself drifting into a kind of half-sleep, his body swaying with the camel's gait, his mind wandering through memories. He thought of the first time he had seen the Nile after a long journey, how the green of the fields had seemed impossibly bright, how the water had tasted sweeter than any drink he had ever known. Thought of the markets in Merah, the capital of Kush, with their stalls of gold and ivory and incense, the noise and the colors and the smells. He thought of the women who sold cumin and coriander, their voices high and quick, bargaining with the traders. He thought of the night he had met his wife many years ago at a festival in a village near the river. She had been dancing, her bracelets clinking, her hair braided with beads. He had been too shy to speak to her, but his friends had pushed him forward. He had fumbled for words, and she had laughed, a sound like the tinkling of water over stones. They had been married within the year. She had traveled with him for a time, but she had hated the desert. The heat made her ill, and the silence made her uneasy. So she had stayed in the village, raising their children, while he moved between the worlds of sand and river. He had loved her deeply, and he still missed her, even though she had been gone for many years now. He carried a small pouch of her hair tied with a red thread, tucked inside his tunic, close to his heart. The boy's voice pulled him back. "Grandfather, look. There are more stones, but these are different." The old trader looked. The boy was pointing to a cluster of rocks up ahead, piled in a rough pyramid shape. The old trader recognized it. "That is a marker," he said. "The Nubians built them along the trade routes to show the way. They are not tall, just piles of stones, but they have been standing for centuries. Some of them have carvings, symbols that tell a story. We will stop there and rest for a while." They reached the marker, and the caravan halted. The traders dismounted, stretching their legs, checking the camel's feet. The old trader walked around the pile of stones, looking for any new marks. He found a small etching, perhaps a few years old, of a camel and a crescent moon. That meant that a trader from a certain tribe had passed this way, heading west. The old trader smiled. It was like a conversation, a dialogue across time. Someone had been here, and now he was here, and the stones remembered both. He sat down in the shade of the pile, and the boy sat next to him. The boy was quiet, picking at a loose thread on his sleeve. The old trader could sense that he was thinking, digesting, growing. He did not push. He simply sat, feeling the coolness of the rock against his back, listening to the sounds of the caravan settling. After a while, the boy spoke. "Grandfather, when you were young, did you ever get lost?" The old trader considered the question. "Yes," he said, "once. I was still a boy, younger than you. I was playing near the camp, chasing a lizard. I ran too far, and when I turned around, I could not see the tents. I was surrounded by dunes, all of them looking the same. I panicked. I started to run in one direction, then another. I was crying. I was sure I would die. What did you do?" I remembered what my father had told me. He said, "If you are lost, stop. Do not run. Find a high place and look for a landmark." So I climbed the tallest dune I could find. It took a long time. My legs were shaking. But when I reached the top, I saw the black smoke from the cooking fire. It was far away, but it was there. I walked toward it slowly, carefully. And when I reached the camp, my father was waiting. He did not scold me. He just hugged me and gave me some water. He said, "You found your own way home. That is good. That is what a trader does." The boy nodded. He seemed satisfied with the answer. The old trader looked at him and saw that his eyes were growing heavy again. The heat and the rocking of the camel were making him sleepy. He said, "You can rest your head on my shoulder if you want." The boy leaned into him, and soon his breathing became slow and steady. The old trader sat there, holding his grandson, watching the heat shimmer on the sand. He thought about the long history of this route, the countless pairs of feet and paws and hooves that had passed this way. He thought about the traders of Kush, who had carried ebony and ivory and gold to Egypt, and brought back glass and wine and olive oil. He thought about the skill it took to cross this land without a map, without a compass, without anything but knowledge passed down through the generations. It was not a skill of the mind only, but of the body and the spirit. You had to feel the desert, not just think about it. And he thought about the changes he had seen in his lifetime. New tools, new kinds of saddles, new ways of storing water. But the heart of the journey remained the same. It was about moving, about connecting, about surviving. It was about trusting the ones who came before you. It was about sharing the load, sharing the story, sharing the warmth of the fire. The caravan stayed at the marker for about an hour, long enough for the camels to rest and for the humans to eat a simple meal of dates and bread. Then they packed up again and moved on. The afternoon passed slowly. The sun moved across the sky and the shadows lengthened. The old trader pointed out a falcon, a distant range of hills, a patch of ground where the sand was darker, indicating the ruins of an ancient settlement. He told the boy about the people who had lived there, a little-known group called the Kerma, who had built a city of mud brick long before the pyramids of Egypt. The boy listened, half asleep, but the words sank in. They always did. By the time the sun began to sink toward the horizon, the caravan had reached its destination for the day, another oasis, smaller than the Wadi El Natron, but still green and welcoming. The trees were mostly acacias, their umbrella-shaped canopies providing shade. A small spring bubbled up from the ground, clear and cool. The traders set up camp with practiced efficiency. The fire was lit. The camels were watered and fed. The children played a game of chase among the trees. The The old trader sat on a blanket, his back against a tree trunk, watching the sky turn pink and purple and deep blue. His grandson came and sat beside him, holding a small piece of wood he had found. He whittled it with a knife the old trader had given him, a gift for his last birthday. He was making a camel figure, crude but recognizable. The old trader watched without comment. He remembered the first time he had tried to whittle, how the wood had split, how he had cut his thumb. But he had learned. And one day the boy would learn too. The night fell, and the stars came out, one by one, then all at once, a great canopy of light. The fire burned low. The old trader began to tell another story, this one about a Nubian princess who had defied her father and set out across the desert with a single camel and a bag of gold to find a flower that bloomed only in the deepest sand. It was a story of courage and foolishness, of love and loss, of the things we search for and the things we find instead. The boy listened, leaning against his grandfather, his eyelids growing heavy. The story was long and winding, full of false leads and near escapes. But eventually, the princess found the flower, which turned out to be nothing more than a small white blossom that grew in the crack of a rock. She picked it, and as she did, she realized that the search itself had been the true gift. She returned home not with glory, but with wisdom. And that, the old trader said, is the real treasure of the desert. Not the gold, not the goods, not the fame. It is the journey itself, the going and the coming, the learning and the telling. The boy was asleep before the story ended, his head resting on the old trader's lap. The figure of the camel had fallen from his hand, half carved, a tiny piece of art waiting to be finished. The old trader picked it up and looked at it in the firelight. He smiled. He would finish it for him, a surprise for the morning. He tucked it into his own pouch for safekeeping. He lay back, looking up at the stars. The same stars the princess had looked at, the same stars his father had seen, the same stars that had guided the traders for 1,000 generations. They were constant, faithful, and quiet. And the desert below them, also constant, also faithful, also quiet, held the memories of all who had passed, like a keeper of 1,000,000 stories. The old trader closed his eyes. He let the sounds of the night wash over him. The crackle of the fire, the soft noise of a camel shifting its weight, the distant call of an owl, and the slow, steady breathing of his grandson. It was a lullaby, this collection of sounds, a music that had played for millennia, and he was part of it. And so, dear listener, as the fire dims and the stars turn, you too can let go of the day. You have walked with the traders, seen the oases, felt the wind, learned the ways of the desert. The knowledge is not just in the facts, but in the experience, in the quiet moments between words. You can close your eyes now and know that you have journeyed far and that you are safe. The desert is still. The caravan rests. The stories wait, patient as sand. And you, wherever you are held in the same ancient night. Let your breathing slow. Let your mind drift. The stars are kind, and the journey continues, even in sleep. Good night. But of course, the night is not the end. Even in the deepest sleep, the world keeps turning. The stars keep wheeling, and the desert keeps its slow, patient breath. The old trader knew this well. He had woken many times in the dark to check on the camels, to add a log to the fire, to simply sit and listen. And so, as the fire burned down to embers, he stirred, not to wake the boy, but to adjust the blanket around them both. The night air had grown cool, and he wanted the child to stay warm. He looked up again. The constellations were different here than in the north. The old trader had learned them from his father, who had learned them from his father, all the way back to the time when the first Nubian traders looked up and saw not random lights, but a map. There was the shape they called the crocodile, with its long tail pointing toward the river they sought. There was the cluster they called the many jars, which reminded them to check their water skins. And there, just above the horizon, the faint star they called the quiet one, which appeared only in the driest months, a sign that the well ahead would still be full. The old trader smiled. He had never seen a map drawn on papyrus or parchment. He had no need. The map was written in his memory, in the feel of the sand under his feet, in the angle of the shadows at noon, in the taste of the wind when it carried the scent of distant water. It was a map that could not be stolen or burned or lost. It lived in the bones. He thought of the boy asleep, already learning the same lessons without knowing it. Tomorrow, he would wake and eat and climb onto the camel again, and the journey would continue. And the day after that, and the day after that, until they reached the great river, the Nile, where they would trade their goods and hear news from other lands. And then, after a few days of rest, they would turn back, carrying new stories, new goods, new memories. And the boy would grow, and one day he would be the one sitting by the fire, telling stories to a child of his own. That is how the knowledge traveled, not in books or schools, but in the quiet moments between sunset and sunrise, in the sharing of a date, in the point of a finger toward a distant dune. It was patient. It was gentle. It was alive. The old trader let out a long, slow breath. He could feel the age in his knees, the weariness in his shoulders. But he also felt a deep contentment, a sense of belonging to something larger than himself. The caravan was his home. The desert was his garden. The stars were his ceiling. And then, as if the universe itself were adding its own lullaby, a thin sliver of moon rose above the eastern hills. It cast a pale light over the camp, soft and silver, turning the sand into a quiet sea. The old trader watched it for a long time, until his own eyes grew heavy. He leaned his head back against the tree trunk and let himself drift. He dreamed of a river of stars flowing through a valley of sand. He dreamed of camels with eyes like polished stones. He dreamed of his wife, long gone, her voice singing a song he had almost forgotten. He dreamed of the boy, grown and strong, leading his own caravan across the dunes, following the same stars. And when he woke, just before dawn, the boy was still asleep. The fire was ash, and the world was silent and gray, waiting for the first light. The old trader stretched, careful not to disturb the child, and prepared to greet the new day. Dear listener, you too are wrapped in that that same gray quiet. The night is nearly over, the journey is complete, and the story has settled into your mind like a warm stone in a still pool. You can let it rest there, peaceful and deep. There is no need to hold on to it tightly. It will stay with you, like the memory of a gentle hand on your shoulder, or the scent of acacia smoke on a desert wind. The traders are packing now. The camels are rising. The children are rubbing their eyes, but you do not need to follow them. You have traveled far enough. You can stay here in the softness of the morning and know that the desert will always be there, patient and kind, waiting for the next dreamer. Good night and safe journeys.